My guest
All right.
today is George Ashton, class of 1996. How are you today, George?
I'm great, Ian. How are you?
I'm pretty good. So tell us what you've been up to since 1996 when you graduated.
Oh, nothing. Just twiddling my thumbs. No, I've been up to a lot. There's been a winding road that until now was sort of a mystery to me. I went from high school to undergrad at William and Mary, and then from William and Mary to work at Arthur Anderson for a while, doing strategy, finance, and economics in DC, consulting. And then I went from there to Fannie Mae. And while I was at Fannie Mae, I was doing really housing goals, compliance, and sort of impact focused metrics for Fannie Mae's activities in the housing space. And while there, I actually got my MBA at University of Maryland and then moved over to trading, which sort of introduced me to the financial world and structured finance and trading mortgages, et cetera. And then the 2008 hit and the mortgage crisis, and I actually moved into my own business. So, with a partner of mine, we started a solar energy company called Soul Systems, ran that for about 10, 11 years. Lots of success there, grew to about 80 employees and two exits, and just a great time and, tumultuous journey, of course, but a great time nonetheless. Decided after our second exit that I wanted to move into community development and impact investing, and so ended up at LISC, which is one of the largest CDFIs in the country, doing impact investments. And then COVID hit and George Floyd, and now there's all this renewed energy towards racial and social equity and helping out small businesses. So it's just been great in terms of just being in the right spot at the right time. So I feel blessed to be on this journey, but that's sort of been my journey since high school.
Very cool. So you mentioned like this summer obviously has been exceptional in terms of renewed energy, as you put it, in terms of social justice and racial justice. How have you kind of dealt with what I assume are probably very conflicting feelings of the injustice, but then also this opportunity to make people aware of the injustice, the opportunity for you specifically to take a lot of financial assets from companies, large corporations, and actually do good with that? Like, how do those two things mix with you?
Yeah, I think for me it's just a very practical perspective on the whole matter. So I don't think there is a whole lot of value in being angry at the situation, although it's justified to be angry for sure.
Mhm.
And frankly, in terms of guilt and privilege, I think those are understandably notions that are important to the dynamic, but I don't know that those are that helpful either. I think at the end of the day, there are just so many things that need to be done to rectify the sort of historic systematic oppression that has happened in this country, to poor blacks and poor whites, quite frankly. And I think the country success in the future relies on it. So it's really a time to sort of come together and figure out how to do that. And so anyone who's willing to get involved with a corporation or an individual or a politician, if even if they're doing it for maybe some of the more optimistic, opportunistic reasons, it doesn't matter. We just need as much sort of positive momentum and capital moving towards solving those issues as we can for the benefit of the country as a whole.
So you obviously there's a ton of people who need help. How do you go about finding who to give help to? Like how do you take all of these opportunities for small businesses and just helping people and figure out who gets what?
Yeah, this is sort of the one of the reasons why I was attracted to Lisk in particular as a company. It's an interesting combination of sort of national sophistication and our offices in Chicago, New York, and DC, which are very like high level capital markets, scalable financial solutions focused. But then the other half of the company, and maybe the majority of the company, is actually people in local offices in cities all over the country. And honestly, it brings me back to this notion that not all shoes fit the same foot, right? Like so, at the end of the day, some of the challenges in rural Indiana are different than the challenges in LA. And so, I really like about this company is they have local offices and rural partners all over the country, and we listen to them. We actually listen to what they have to say about the challenges in their communities and how we have to adjust sort of national solutions to fit those local challenges, and then we implement according to those dynamics. So I think, in terms of finding those people, we found them. And so then it's very good for me because being in DC and with the group that I'm running, it's really about how then do we accumulate resources to actually filter down to those local spots and fix those challenges that we see.
How how early in your life did you know that economics and or financial analysis was your calling? Like how soon did you know that was going to be the thing you were going to focus on with your career?
Yeah, that's interesting. Even in high school, good old high school, I appreciated facts and figures and bullet points more than I appreciated prose and narratives. So I think that might have been my first clue that I was probably more of a right brain than a left brain in some ways. And I think, but figuring out what it meant for me, again, in my sort of wandering journey through, Arthur Anderson and Fannie Mae and all these things that I sort of was involved in along the way, I think it didn't become crystal clear to me how I would use all those talents until I got into this role where I'm utilizing so many of them. In addition to, I would say, the more spiritual or left brain side of me that really just wants to help people and be involved. So I don't know that I knew at any one point where the journey was headed. Um, I think even right now, I don't know where the journey will end. And so I think it's really about being optimistic, taking advantage of the opportunities that are right in front of you, working hard, having some faith in the universe, all of that, I think, and then having the right focus, focusing on what's important. And one of the things I've learned along the way is, if you ever want to get important things done, you can't be overly concerned with who gets the credit. And I think that has become more and more true as I've sort of moved through life. So I hope I figured it out, but you never know.
Sure. Yeah, I think that you have to be very willing to change no matter how much you think you've got a mission in life. Like something's going to happen, and being able to roll with the punches is part
Yeah.
of what makes it fun.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. And I think you have to have, I mean, it's not easy to have faith in the universe. And it's not just faith in just like happenstance. I think it's also faith in yourself and how you interact with the universe. And that if you have a positive outset and you work hard and you sort of do the right things, that good things will come your way. And I'm sure there are folks who felt like they've done that and it hasn't worked out, but so far it has for me. And so I hope it will for others as well.
The solar project that you had before, is that continued? In Are you still doing that solar work on in addition to your work at Lisk?
Yeah, so I'm still on the company has continued,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still an owner and on the board of the company as well. And this has sort of been one of my MOs thus far in terms of patterns to life as well. I love to get involved and set up things and create institutions that are larger than who I am, and then to see them persist well beyond my own involvement. And I think in many ways you haven't had success in creating something unless it can persist without your direct involvement. And I think for many that's sort of a different perspective than maybe the sort of ego forward perspective of, hey, this is mine and I want to make it mine, I want to grow it, I want it to be always mine. And maybe it's tied more to an altruistic notion of putting good energy out into the world and hoping that it continues to roll forward. But certainly with Soul Systems, with the solar company, with the investment club that I started, but then recently handed over the presidency to somebody else. It's a very intentional desire to create a bunch of positive momentum and positive movements in the world. And the way that I sort of really know that they're successful is if they persist without me having to be the one that leads them, because they were sort of pure in nature and they meant enough to other people to continue to move forward. So um, that's really important, I think, in terms of your influence in the world.
Totally, it's kind of a Johnny Appleseed like
Yeah,
mentality.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
One of the things I saw, and I think the press release where you were brought on to Lisk was talk about opportunity zones. I think this was an element of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act that I missed, and I think a lot of people missed too. A lot of the press kind of picked up on that being sort of Trump's act as being a lot of tax cuts for the rich and all that. But this seems like one of the more like genuinely good aspects, or serving underprivileged people is the opportunity zones. Can you talk just a second about like what the opportunity zones are and how that works into the work that you do?
Absolutely. And it's less of a focus today than it was when I first started here. But when I first started, I was brought on to lead the Opportunity Zone strategy. What was exciting about Opportunity Zones for the community development space was this huge tax break to bring equity investors into community development on behalf of sort of rejuvenating economies and communities for underinvested spaces. I think for many that were involved, the intentions were pure. The mechanisms were challenging for sure. And this again is a life lesson that I've sort of come to, which is just admitting when something is not what you thought it was going to be,
Hmm.
when you figure that out. And I think Opportunity Zones is a good example of that. We had held a lot of sort of promise and hope around what that would mean for communities. And just between the way it was structured and the way that it was executed, it just didn't turn out to be as promising for the communities themselves as we had hoped it would be. And so being able to sort of admit that and then push for change to legislation is sort of where we're at now, and hoping that potentially with some changes in policy that we can make it more targeted towards what's good for the folks who currently exist in that community. Right now, there aren't a whole lot of guidelines around how impactful the investment must be, and who it should benefit. And so, it can be misused very easily. And any policy can be misused, but good policy really incentivizes positive use of
Hmm.
the incentive or of the tax break. And so, trying to mold that into something better, I think, is where we are right now. But I was honest as I sort of came into the space and was talking through the concepts and the implementation with folks. I became aware of the double-headed dragon that we were sort of dealing with, and we just became honest about it. And I think that's sort of the way to handle a situation like that.
What's changed the most this summer with COVID in terms of how you do your work, how you find opportunities and businesses to invest in? Like, what's the most different for you this year versus last?
The most different thing, quite frankly, is this concept of racial equity and racial
Hmm.
justice. I'm currently raising a fund called the Black Economic Development Fund. I don't suspect that I ever thought that I would be able to raise an institutional based fund that had the word black in it. And I think that is a uh, poetic license that we have now
Hmm.
that we didn't have before George Floyd, quite frankly. So, and then people, corporations and investors are committing to it very quickly and getting on board with the concept. And what's exciting about that is we potentially can think about the solutions that are very specific to the challenges for African Americans in this country. And so that's probably been one of the biggest changes. The other big changes are what they are for everyone else, which is, working with and doing business with folks that you never met before. I've hired 3 new people that I never met before in real life. So all of this was a bit, troublesome, but nonetheless, it's a good spot to be in.
Um, Anything that you want to share that I haven't asked you about?
Um, no, I think at the end of the day, whether this is for the students that are in high school or the alumni that are listening to it, I think one of the things I would probably speak to is how special the high school experience was for me. I still say to this day that I never worked as hard in my life as I worked in high school, in terms of just what the experience that Governor School brought, in terms of the competing intellects, but also just the workload in general. And I think it was an incredible opportunity. So I'm forever grateful and happy at the very least to do an interview to sort of share that. And I would encourage other alum to contribute to the school, but also to be open to sharing their stories as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, George.
No problem, Ian. Thank you.